Welcome to TheDPost Sports Chat. I'm Drew Rubenstein here again with Justin Jackson. And WVU men's basketball team's in a stretch here where just 2 games over 2 weeks coming out of Monday's win against Iowa State. They have Texas on Saturday, then a week off, and then Baylor the next Saturday. And we're talking about NCAA Tournament in the Mountaineers. And how did we get to this point so quickly?
I mean, really, when you look at it, this team has just had a tremendous turnaround. And really, if you go back 3.5 weeks ago when they lost to Kansas State, put on a 20-some point win, and you kind of think, well, what's going to happen here? And you certainly didn't see this turnaround coming. They've beaten. They beat Baylor. They've beaten Kansas State. Came back and beat Kansas State at home. They beat Oklahoma, and now they've beaten Iowa State, and and played very well against Kansas at Kansas, which a lot of teams don't do. Right now, they have a shot to finish. They're 1 game out of second place in the league standings, and they have a shot to finish in the top 3 of the conference. And how they got here. They started making shots. They started playing. Defensively, they're much better. I think if you look at the points that they've allowed over the last 5 games, they're lower than what they were. Heading into the beginning. Heading into the conference season. So they're making shots. They're playing better defense, and I think they're just more mature. They're coming around. I think there's a lot of issues that really go into it.
There certainly are, but one interesting thing, I guess, just to look at to try to narrow the focus a little bit is you had a chance to talk to Jawan Statens about what his layup in the closing seconds at Baylor meant to this team, and really, is that the catalyst? Was it just maybe this team needed to finally get over the hump once, and then everything else just started flowing from there?
Yeah, it seems like that, and it was kind of interesting. I asked him, I said, this all kind of goes back to that last second shot he hit against Baylor, and that was a shot that beat the Bears and kind of got the ball rolling for them. And I asked him, I said, what happens if you miss that shot? And he kind of stopped and thought about it, and he still thinks that this run still would have happened, that this team was getting more mature, these players had always believed in themselves and believed in the team and thought it would eventually come around. So I think had he not made that shot, had they lost that game against Baylor, maybe a 1 or 2 game difference, but I think the turnaround, Jawan thinks the turnaround still would have happened eventually.
We mentioned the NCAA tournament. They're in the conversation. Nobody would have thought it would have happened a couple weeks ago. And I even posed this question to you: Is that a realistic expectation for this team? And now it seems like it is realistic. But when you look at how they finish things up, I mean, is that the end game here? I mean, if they don't get there, does it kind of take away from what has happened? Or if they get in the NIT, is it still considered a successful season at this point?
I think if they get into the NIT, it's still a very good season. But at this point, you really do have to start talking about the NCAA tournament and what has to happen and what kind of things can happen. A couple weeks ago, the NIT seemed out of the question, but now you kind of look at the schedule and okay, well, they've got a home game against Baylor coming up. They got a home game against TCU coming up. They go on the road to Texas. They have a road game at Oklahoma, and then they have a home game with Kansas. And the players believe they can beat Kansas at the Coliseum. Certainly they've beaten Oklahoma at home, so they might be able to travel and go and play well at Oklahoma. You would think that they would beat TCU at home. So, I mean, the opportunity is there. A lot of things still have to go right, but, I mean, they could reach 18, 19 wins heading into the Big 12 tournament, and then you would certainly have to maybe win 1 or 2 more there. You would think if you can get to 20 wins, I think that would be pretty safe with the schedule that they've played. Their strength of schedule is very good. Their RPI is dipping below, getting ready to dip below 70 in the coming days. So I think everything is kind of in place for them, but they have to keep winning. They have to beat a Baylor and beat TCU, and maybe this game against Texas. I don't know if it's really a must-win, but it would be a very crucial and important win if West Virginia would be able to get it on Saturday. So it depends on what happens from here on out, but they're certainly in the conversation for the NCAA tournament.
Let's look at that a little more closely. So they say they beat Baylor and TCU at home. Those are the two that they kind of have to have.
Right.
So that gets them up to 17
17.
wins, and then you're saying 20 is maybe where they have to be, so they have to steal 2 other games where they're going to be the underdog and then win one in the Big 12, or is 20 the number, 19 a possibility? Because you start having to look at the rest of the field and how all that factors in as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's still some bad losses on their resume.
Yeah.
That loss to Virginia Tech really is going to hurt them. I mean, Virginia Tech is last place in the ACC right now, and they've lost like 8 or 9. They're 1-10 in the ACC play, and they've lost a number of games in a row. So I mean, that's going to be a bad loss on their resume. And you know, 20 has always been kind of a magic number. I know Kevin Jones' senior year, they made it with 19, and then that was a special set of circumstances. They played a very good schedule that year, better than probably what they've played this year. So I still think 20 probably is a magic number, so that's probably what you're going to have to kind of shoot for. And you can include Big 12 tournament wins in that 20. So if you can get into Kansas City and get it, and maybe win 1 or 2 there, you know, that's also very positive for the team.
Okay. How about women's basketball? Let's switch gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Todd's on vacation, so have you filling in here? Let's get into a little bit on the women's basketball side of things.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you look at the women's team; they're certainly in a much better position. You know, they've already got 20 wins, and Bria Holmes is playing very well right now, and they have a pretty good schedule coming up. You know, the rankings came out; they're ranked 13th in the AP poll, and they really have things rolling. Just kind of talk about you know, where they can go from here, and what is you know, a realistic postseason destination for them.
Sure. I mean, I think they are a lock for the NCAA tournament at this point. And I've gotten in this conversation with Todd, too. The way their schedule ends is kind of the opposite of the men's schedule, because other than a trip to Baylor and Oklahoma State at home, on paper, they should win the rest of their games. I mean, they're going to be the favorite. So kind of looking at it like we did with the men's team, if they hold serve, if you will, and beat the teams that they're supposed to, and they beat Oklahoma State, they're probably going to be a top 4 seed, even potentially higher depending on what they do in the Big 12 tournament. And then I think when you start looking at that, really with this group that Mike Carey has, the seniors, and you mentioned Bria Holmes, who I mean, Mike Carey has mentioned has more potential than maybe any other player he's had at WVU. Just getting 3 or 4 seed in the NCAA tournament's not going to be good enough. I mean, this team is going to be remembered what it does in March. No secret that Mike Carey's never gotten out of the second round of the NCAA tournament, and I think a lot of his legacy and even this team's legacy is going to be dependent on really what they do in that second round NCAA tournament game. And I know it seems maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves in February, but really with the team that he has, I mean, this is similar. I think almost a similar type of conversation to the 2010 NCAA Final Four team with Bob Huggins. Not that they had to get to maybe the Final Four to be successful, but really this is the group that he's been building to make a run at things.
They are second place in the Big 12 right now. You know, obviously they have 1 game remaining with Baylor. I think they're 1 game behind Baylor right now. Can they catch Baylor? I mean, a conference championship, is it out of the question for this team?
You know, when you look at the first game against Baylor, that dominated the game, but Odyssey Sims just went nuts and dominated that game single-handedly. She is that kind of a player, and she does propose matchup problems. That said, you know, similar type of thing like with the men's team against Kansas State. Can she play that well again? So, I think it's possible, but at this point it's probably a long shot just because you lost at home and you're going to have to go to Baylor, and to expect a win there is going to be awfully tough. So, once you get into the Big 12 tournament, though, and it's on a neutral site, and you never know what will happen, they're probably going to be on opposite sides of the bracket. Sure, they have a chance of making a run and winning that thing.
All right, let's wrap things up here.
All right, very good. Appreciate it. Please continue to check TheDPost.com for the latest on the WVU men's and women's basketball teams. Thanks for watching again.